Tonight, we drift into the deepest trenches of a forgotten war. Not the ones from the pages of history books, but the ones carved beneath memory, soaked in mud, stitched with silence, and lit only by the faint glow of a candle someone had to protect with their own breath. This is the story of a soldier, not a hero, not a name carved in stone, but a boy who grew old in the damp ribs of the earth. A boy whose only shield against the night was a worn wool coat, a letter he never opened, and the sound of a bird that sang through fog. Now, dim the lights, let your breath slow, let the world outside pause, and let us return to a forgotten place, one written in dust, in silence and in soft, crumbling pages. The rain had been falling all night, soft and stubborn, as if the sky had forgotten how to stop. Somewhere beyond the glass, distant thunder rolled like the memory of something ancient, too far to fear but too loud to ignore. Inside the little room, everything was still. A slow-ticking clock, a woolen blanket curled at the edge of a narrow bed, a worn journal resting beneath a folded uniform sleeve never quite put away. The candle had burned low, the wax a curled wave hardened in time. Its scent, old wax, faint oil, lingered like something familiar, something from another room in another year. The window was fogged slightly with breath and rain, and if one looked closely they might see the world on the other side blur into grey, a kind of peace, quiet and half forgotten. He hadn't meant to remember, not tonight, not on a night like this, but the sound of the storm had nudged something open, a drawer in the mind, perhaps, a seam beneath the ribs, something he had sewn shut long ago with silence. Now it pulsed again, slow, reluctant, and from within it came the smell of wet wool, the weight of damp boots, and the taste of tin against cracked lips. He remembered the trench before anything else. The way the wooden slats creaked when you stepped wrong. The way the mud sucked at your heel as if it wanted you to stay. And the silence between shellfire, not quiet, not peaceful, but a hush, thick with waiting. A silence full of breath held too long. That was the sound that stayed with him most. They were boys when they arrived. Most of them had lied a little to get there. Not much, just a year shaved off or a height added in. Their hands shook when they first held the rifles, but their voices still cracked like children. He could still see Carter, the one who carved little names into the stock of his gun, names of the birds he missed back home. "So I don't forget what doesn't shoot back," he used to say, smiling with more teeth than sense. The first night had been the worst. The sky had split open in flashes, not of stars but fire, and they had crouched in soaked coats, water pooling at their knees, unsure of whether to shiver from fear or the cold. One of the men, an older corporal with smoke always in his breath, had simply said, "Listen close, you'll hear the rats before the bullets." And he had been right. There was a rhythm to it all, one that took hold without permission. Mornings began with the sharp scent of soap, if you had any left, and ended with the stale crust of bread dipped in something vaguely broth-like. Boots never dried, socks had to be rotated with prayer, fingers blistered from cleaning guns, then cracked from the frost. And through it all, the letters came, tied with blue string smudged with fingerprints, kissed by someone who still believed you'd come home clean. He recalled one letter in particular. Not from his mother, who wrote in tidy cursive with worried margins, but from his younger sister. She had drawn a picture of their house. Red roof, yellow window glow, a crooked chimney trailing smoke. At the bottom she had written, "Don't forget to come back for Christmas. I'm saving you the last piece of pie." He hadn't replied. He didn't know how to write words that didn't lie. Some men talked in their sleep, others screamed. A few simply stared. There was one man, Taylor, with the blonde hair and fingers always twitching, who used to hum lullabies under his breath when the shelling started. "To calm the mud," he said once. "If I sing soft enough, maybe it won't eat me." Taylor didn't make it through the spring. There was mud everywhere. Not just underfoot, but in the bones of the place. It clung to skin like a memory, thick and unwilling. Sometimes it came up to the knees, and sometimes higher. Once, during a particularly wet week, he had found a helmet half buried. Inside it, still clutched in mud-dark fingers, was a photo of a girl laughing. The eyes had smudged away in water, but the smile stayed. There was beauty too, sometimes, in the way the frost made lace out of barbed wire, in the strange warmth of someone handing you their last dry glove, in a joke shared quietly during roll call. Laughter had become its own kind of rebellion, a weapon against the weight. One morning the fog had been so thick they could hardly see a foot ahead, and yet across the silence a single bird had sung. Just one note, clear and piercing. Everyone froze. Even the sergeant lowered his voice. No one wanted to scare it away. That sound stayed with him longer than any scream. Years later, when people asked him what the war had been like, he never spoke of blood or bravery. He spoke of that bird, of mud that never let go, of the smell of candle wax and steel, of the boy who died with his eyes open, watching stars behind smoke. He had returned home thinner, quieter, and always looking left before entering rooms. But the war had not ended in November. Not for him. It had followed in boots too worn to throw away, in the sound of rain against windows, and in dreams where trenches turned into corridors and rifles whispered. Tonight, the candle burned its last breath. He looked at the coat folded at the edge of the bed, threadbare and still smelling faintly of the past. And he wondered, not for the first time, if anyone had kept the letters he never sent. Outside, the rain softened further, barely a sigh now. The clock ticked on, and somewhere beneath the skin of the world the trench still waited, half dream, half dirt, always listening. If you're still awake, tell me where you are. Tell me what kind of night surrounds you. Maybe someone reading your words will feel a little less alone tonight. The pocket was shallow and frayed, the stitching loose from weeks of crawling across frozen dirt and sandbags, but the letter had stayed, folded into thirds, creased at the edges, soft as cloth from the touch of fingers that never quite stopped checking. It was still there. It had no envelope anymore. That had dissolved in a storm 2 days after arrival. And the ink, once black and confident, had blurred at the edges, like something half remembered in a dream. But the shape of the words, their rhythm, their pauses, still lived inside him. He had received it on a Wednesday, though the trenches did not keep days. Time passed differently here, in ration drops, in fogs, in whistles that meant you might not return. A boy named Alcott had brought it down the line, his fingers blue with cold, and said, "From home." Just that. No smile, no extra breath. He didn't need to say more. The word alone was enough to still a heart mid-beat. He hadn't opened it for hours. Something about the weight of it frightened him. Not the message. No, he knew what it would say. His sister's handwriting always came with gentleness. But there was something final in the feel of the paper, like a door might close the moment it was read. So he'd kept it folded, tucked against his chest beneath the inner flap of his greatcoat, letting its warmth, imagined or not, press into his ribs. When he finally unfolded it that night, the lantern above had been swaying in the wind. The walls of the dugout trembled with each gust. He held the paper carefully, as if it might shatter in his hands. She had written of the garden, a frost on the windows and jam boiling in the kitchen. She said the neighbours had asked about him. She said their dog had taken to sleeping on his bed. She said nothing about the war. And at the very bottom, beneath the rest, she had drawn a tiny heart. It was smudged now, but he remembered where it had been. He had traced that little heart with his thumb more times than he could count, even after the words had long since faded into the fibres of the page. He hadn't told anyone about it, not even Carter, who shared cigarettes and secrets like they were the same thing. There were few things left a man could keep only to himself out here. Dry socks, if you were lucky, a biscuit hidden in your boot. But a letter could belong to just one soul. That was sacred. That was private. In the nights that followed, he kept the letter close. He'd touch the pocket without looking, just to know it was still there. It became a ritual. Before patrols, after sleep. Whenever the shelling grew close enough to shake the dirt loose from the ceiling, it was a tether, a string that tied him to another world. A quieter one, a cleaner one. A world where he still existed as more than just a number on a roll call. One afternoon, while cleaning mud from his rifle, a new boy named Harrington asked if he'd ever been in love. The question came out of nowhere, hanging awkwardly in the damp air. Most would have laughed it off, thrown a joke, swatted the air with false bravado, but he'd paused. He hadn't been, not the way people meant it, but he had loved something, not someone, perhaps, but some place. A way the house creaked in winter, the smell of old bread and floured hands, a laugh from the upstairs window when supper burned. Those were the things the letter reminded him of, not of romance, but of place, of self, of being someone who was missed. He hadn't answered Harrington, just nodded once and returned to the task. But later, when the boy wasn't looking, he slipped him a wrapped sugar cube from his rations. Harrington's hands trembled when he took it, and he nodded back without a word. The letter survived longer than some of the men. It stayed with him through the gas attack that turned the morning gold and bitter. It stayed through the flooding that lifted corpses like driftwood from the lower trench. It stayed through frostbite and hunger and silence. And through all of it, he never once reread it. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't bear to see the words vanish completely. Each time it was touched, the ink wore thinner. A name at the top disappeared. Then a word in the middle, until only fragments remained. A single U, a faded miss, a small smudge where the heart used to be. It was enough. One night, while crouched behind the firing step during a barrage, he felt something shift in his coat. A sharp jolt, not pain, not yet, but a tearing. When the light returned, he saw the coat had been grazed, a single slice clean as a paper cut across the pocket's edge. The letter was torn, split down its centre like a wound. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, he simply pressed both halves together and tucked them back where they belonged, as if mending them with his body's warmth. And from that moment on, he never reached for it again. It would stay there, always, unopened, unread, but still his. Weeks later, during a lull between orders, he watched a crow perch on the edge of the trench wall, black and wet and servant. It stared down at him as if it knew something, as if it had seen the letter too. The others threw stones to chase it away, but it didn't move. Not until he whispered something soft beneath his breath. Something only the letter would have understood. Then it flew. They called for movement the next day, a transfer to another sector, and when he packed his things, he left almost everything behind. He didn't take his tin plate, he didn't take the matches or the compass or the extra scarf, but he took the letter, both halves still folded, still warm, and slipped them into the same pocket of a new coat. The war would move, the trenches would change, but the letter would remain, like a second skin, like breath. Even now, in the quiet years that followed, he often woke in the middle of the night reaching for that same coat. Not because he expected it to still be there, but because in dreams it always was. And in those dreams the ink never faded. It began in the kind of dawn that never fully arrived, grey, reluctant, and so thick with fog it felt like stepping into the breath of a sleeping world. The station had been quiet, not with peace, but with the hush of waiting. Boots clacked on stone, steam curled from beneath the iron beast of a train like incense from a funeral. Men stood in clusters, boys really, gripping duffel bags too large for their frames, uniforms still stiff with newness, buttons not yet dulled by the blood or rain. He had boarded without speaking. His ticket had no seat number, just a name scrawled in black ink, already smudged by damp fingers. He took the third car from the back and slid into a corner near the window, though there wasn't much to see, just fog. Endless, thick, trembling fog clung to the glass like fingers. It blurred the buildings, the trees, even the platform they'd just left behind. Across from him sat a boy with red hair and a photograph clenched in one hand. The photo was of a girl, smiling wide, head tilted, just so, like she'd been caught mid-laugh. He didn't speak either. He just looked down at the image, blinked once, and exhaled as though trying not to shiver. The whistle came not like a sound, but like a wound. It split the air open. The train shuddered, groaned, and lurched forward with the weight of something ancient. And just like that, the journey began, not toward glory, not toward maps or medals, but toward the mud, toward a place where the earth had teeth and the sky had forgotten how to show stars. The train moved slowly at first. Trees passed like ghosts, bending in wind they no longer resisted. Farmland blurred past, silent and bare. Villages hunched low against the horizon, their chimneys coughing soft smoke into the grey. Once he saw a woman standing alone by a gate, a shawl wrapped tightly around her arms. She wasn't waving, just watching, eyes wide, still as stone. He wondered who she had lost already, and who she would lose again. Inside the car no one spoke much. A few whispers, a laugh here and there, quickly swallowed. Some tried to read newspapers, their hands shaking so much the pages rustled like dry leaves. Most just stared, at boots, at their laps, at nothing. The air smelled of leather, damp wool, and fear so thick it could have been bottled. He thought of the trench, not because he had seen it, but because everyone spoke of it the way people speak of a shadow at the end of a hallway, real only once you've stepped inside it. They said the rats were the size of cats, that the lice learned your name, that men could drown standing up if they slept in the wrong corner. He tried not to imagine it, but the train was taking him there, whether he dreamed it or not. Hours passed. The fog thinned just enough to reveal fields dotted with canvas tents and wagons drawn like bones across the grass. Soldiers marched along muddy roads beside the tracks, heads bowed, rifles slung. Some looked up when the train passed, but most didn't. A few saluted. One simply raised a cigarette in mock toast. He couldn't tell if it was sarcasm or pity. The red-haired boy finally spoke, just once. "She told me to bring her back something," he said, holding up the photo. "A flower. From France." He didn't reply. What could he say? That flowers didn't grow where they were going, that nothing did except silence and ghosts? Instead, he nodded once, not in agreement, but in memory. He had once promised something too, a piece of ribbon, a story, a smile that wasn't forced. He couldn't remember what anymore. The train stopped once, not for long, just enough to let a group of medics board. Their coats were already stained, and their eyes had the look of people who no longer blinked at broken things. One of them sat beside him for a while, unwrapping a sandwich that smelled faintly of onion and stale bread. "You knew?" the medic asked. He nodded. "Don't forget to tie your boots tight," the medic said after a pause. "The mud takes what's loose." And then he was gone. They rolled on into dusk. The sky turned violet, then ash. Lamps flickered on inside the car, casting long shadows across tired faces. Some of the men slept sitting up, their heads bumping windows or falling against each other's shoulders without apology. Others clutched keepsakes in their hands, coins, letters, the occasional dog-eared prayer card. One boy held a single glove to his chest, as if someone else still wore the other half of it somewhere far from here. He couldn't sleep. Every time his eyes closed, he saw the fog again, not the one outside, but the one that lived in his ribs now, curling tight around memory. He opened the letter again, the same one from his sister, now folded into a square no bigger than his palm. He didn't read it this time, he just touched it. Let it remind him who he had been before the uniform, before the train, before the earth became hungry. When the train finally slowed, it was near midnight. There were no lights, no station, just a platform built from splintered wood and mud so deep it reached the ankles in one step. An officer barked orders as they disembarked, voice sharp and flat. "Keep moving. Don't ask questions. Don't look back." And they didn't. Not because they didn't want to, but because they were too tired, too numb. He stepped off the train and into a different world. The fog was still there, but now it moved like it had breath, like it watched. The ground squelched beneath his feet, thick and cold and waiting. In the distance he heard the faint whistle of something falling. Not yet, not close, but coming. He adjusted his coat, checked the pocket for the letter, and took his first step toward the front. The mud greeted him like an old friend, and the silence that followed felt like it had been waiting just for him. They led them by lantern light, past rows of silent tents and skeletons of trees that bent beneath the weight of fog. The path was narrow and slick, bordered by wire and the whisper of unseen things. Somewhere to the left something howled, not an animal, not a man, but something in between. No one spoke of it. They just kept walking, boots sinking deeper with every step. He had thought the trench would be a straight line, a single slit across the ground. But when they reached it, it unfolded beneath them like a wound, jagged, crumbling, never quite the same from one turn to the next. It wasn't dug into earth. It was carved out of memory, stitched with wire, braced with planks long rotted and dark with old blood. Smoke hung low in the air, so low it curled into their mouths when they breathed. The first step down was a fall. The mud didn't wait to welcome them. It grabbed at ankles, tugged at soles, hissed, as if warning them not to settle in too deep. One boy slipped immediately and landed in a pool of water too dark to measure. They pulled him up, laughing, but not kindly. Not cruelly either. Just flat. Just tired. "Welcome to your new home," someone muttered. The walls were close, not just narrow but intimate, like walking inside a throat. The wooden slats pressed at their backs. The sandbags above dripped slowly, as if the sky wept in place of those who no longer could. The smell hit next, not of death, not exactly, but of damp wool, sweat, iron, and rot too old to name. It was the smell of forgetting, of days blurred together, of wounds too deep to scab. They were shown to their section, a crooked bend nicknamed the Elbow, where water pooled in corners and rats the size of loaf bread darted without fear. The man in charge, Sergeant Lorne, had eyes that didn't blink when the lantern swung too near. He simply gestured. You sleep there, you piss there. You don't stand here unless you want your head gone. Simple instruction. No greeting, no ceremony. Just cold mechanical survival. The bed was a shelf of dirt, a blanket shared by two. He dropped his pack, sat down slowly and exhaled. That breath didn't return for some time. Carter was already there. He had arrived days earlier, and though his smile remained, it looked tired now, like it had been peeled off and sewn back on. He offered a half cigar and a nod. They shoot at random after 2 a.m, don't ask why, just duck. That night no one slept. Some closed their eyes, others chewed tobacco or stared at the plank above their heads, counting the knots in the wood as if numbers could protect them. A boy whispered a prayer in a language no one else knew. Another hummed a lullaby beneath his breath, the sound barely louder than the water dripping nearby. Then came the first breath of the trench, not literal, but something deeper. A silence that expanded, stretched, settled into their lungs like ash. It didn't matter if there was no shelling that night. The trench breathed on its own. It inhaled every new arrival and exhaled something else. Something thinner. Something less. He lay on his side, hand tucked over the letter in his coat pocket, and stared into the dim. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. Shadows moved like fingers, mud shifted. A rat passed near his boots and didn't stop, simply moved over his leg as if he were furniture. At some point a flare went up in the distance, green light spilling over the top edge of the trench, painting everything sickly. They all froze, eyes wide. That light meant someone had crossed the wire. Maybe a scout. Maybe a mistake. Maybe something worse. They waited. The light faded. No gunfire, just more waiting. It was then that he realised the true shape of the place. Not the physical angles, not the layout, but the way it held breath. The trench wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a presence, watching, listening, measuring every footstep like a toll collector, and they had paid with time. In the morning, if it could be called that, the mist did not lift. The sun rose, they were told, but it never came down far enough to touch them. They were handed bread too hard to bite and water that tasted of tin. The latrine overflowed from the night's rain. A new body arrived by cart, face covered, boots still on. No one asked his name, no one looked twice. They worked because that was what you did. You dug, you filled sandbags, you patched the wall where a mortar had bitten it the week before. You collected fragments of shrapnel to be logged. You cleaned rifles until the smell of oil clung to your hands like a second skin. And through it all, the trench breathed. At one point, a man named Harker slipped from the fire step and broke his leg in the mud. They called for a stretcher, but it took too long. By the time they arrived, his leg was twisted and pale, and his eyes were wild with pain. "Better than the gas," he said through clenched teeth. "Least I get to leave." And they all nodded. Not because they agreed, but because it was the only way to acknowledge the truth without saying it out loud. By dusk, he had memorised the faces around him. The twitch of the corporal's left eye, the way Carter picked at his nails, the quiet sob of the boy who hadn't spoken since the train. He catalogued them not because he wanted to know them, but because he might have to remember who they were after the next flare went up. That night, as he lay back against the dirt, he pressed the letter once more and whispered, not to God, not to anyone near, but to the trench itself, "I'm still here." The trench did not answer, but it allowed him to sleep. The lice came in silence, not like the shelling or the rats or the screams that echoed through corridors of mud, but in stillness, in sleep, in seams. They arrived like memories that couldn't be scrubbed away, burrowing into wool and skin and hair, with a patience that outlasted even the weather. No one spoke of them at first, but within a week the scratching began. It started with a tickle behind the ear, then at the base of the neck, A slow crawling burn across the shoulder blades, like someone breathing too close. The itching wasn't constant, that would have been easier. It came in waves, in lulls, during the quiet just before breakfast, during night watch. When your hands were full and you couldn't afford to scratch, that was when it was worst. He noticed it first beneath the collar of his shirt. A stiffness, a pinch. He reached up instinctively and caught something between two fingers, tiny, white, alive. He crushed it without looking, and in that moment he knew the war had found a new front. Carter had a comb, not the kind you used for grooming, but a narrow-toothed strip of bone, old and smooth, worn down from weeks of use. He called it the priest, though no one asked why. Every morning before roll call, Carter would sit cross-legged on a plank near the latrine and begin the ritual. Jacket off, shirt pulled halfway down, head bent low. His hands moved with slow, reverent grace, dragging the comb across his scalp, over his chest, down his arms. Each time he paused, he flicked the edge of the comb against the wood, sending a soft click into the air. Sometimes something fell out, sometimes nothing, but he always clicked, just in case. Others joined him. Quietly. No one asked permission. They simply sat, unbuttoned, and began to search themselves. It wasn't about Van Beauty. There were no mirrors here, no pride. This was survival. A moment of control in a place where control was a rare and sacred thing. He joined the ritual on his 6th morning. The itching had grown worse. His skin burned in places he couldn't reach. Carter passed him the comb without a word. It was warm from another's hand. He hesitated only a second, then slid it across the base of his neck. It was a strange kind of intimacy. To sit among men, half undressed, dragging bone against skin while rats scurried past and distant thunder cracked the sky. No one looked at each other. No one made jokes. The lice had levelled them. Stripped rank, stripped shame. Here every man itched the same. The comb pulled more than pests. It pulled stories. Carter spoke first, voice low and even. "Had 'em back home once," he said. "School outbreak. Mum boiled everything we owned." He clicked the comb against the plank. "Here, all we got is spit and patience." Another man, broad-shouldered and missing 2 teeth, added, "Had 'em in the mines too. They don't like coal dust. We'd rub soot in our shirts." He didn't say if it worked. He just kept combing. Some tied thread around their wrists, saying it helped keep them away. Others tucked matchsticks into their collars. Old superstitions mixed with new desperation. One man swore by vinegar, if you could find any. Most simply scratched until they bled. By the 7th day, everyone had a system. Morning comb, midday scratch, evening check. They traded combs, cleaned them on rifle cloths, argued over tooth width like surgeons debating scalpels. It became a kind of unspoken order, a pause in the chaos. Something to do when you couldn't do anything else. But the lice never truly left. Even after scraping and picking, they always returned, hiding in seams, waiting in boots, nesting in the folds of wool that never dried. They were survivors, just like the men, small, persistent, invisible to anyone not living inside the war. One night, during a lull in fire, he woke to find Carter scratching in his sleep. Not a twitch, but a full scraping motion, hand locked into rhythm, nails carving down his arm again and again until blood rose. He reached over and gently touched his shoulder. Carter blinked awake, confused. He looked at his arm, at the blood, the comb still clenched in his fist. "They're still here," he whispered. "I know." That morning the ritual continued. They sat, backs to the wall, sharing what warmth they could. The ground beneath them was slick, the air thick with smoke and damp. The lice comb passed from hand to hand like communion. He ran it through his hair slowly, feeling each tooth drag across the scalp. The scratching didn't stop, but it felt better. Not clean, that word no longer belonged to them, but calmer. Calmer than the whine of incoming shells, calmer than the scream of boots lost in mud, calmer than the sound of his own heart when the sirens wailed. Later, when the sky darkened and the flare went up, they were ordered to the line. Patrol had gone missing. They needed replacements. No one protested. They stood, pulled on their jackets, tucked the combs back into the pockets, and marched forward. He kept the comb with him that night. Not in his kit, not in his pack, but in his left breast pocket, next to the letter. Together, they reminded him of what it meant to be alive, to still feel, to still itch, to still care whether something crawled across his skin. And as he crouched behind the sandbags, staring into the no-man's land beyond, he felt the comb press into his chest with each breath. It was a small pain, a real one, his own. The lice would return, of that he was certain. But so would the ritual. The slow scraping, the shared silence, the sound of bone against skin like prayer. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. The trench became a different creature at night. It breathed deeper, slower, heavier. What little light the sky gave during the day was swallowed whole by the fog, and when dusk fell, it did so like a curtain being drawn over a stage that no longer wished to perform. The world didn't end at night. It disappeared. Shapes faded into ash, sound became law, and everyone moved like ghosts trying not to wake the dead. He had drawn watch duty again. Second shift. The cruel one. Neither early enough to ease into sleep after, nor late enough to greet the morning with any comfort. He stood beneath the makeshift lookout canopy, boots wet, rifle heavy in his hands, his breath visible in the air like smoke from a dying candle. The cold had crept beneath his coat. It lived in his spine now, curling down into his legs like a serpent. He couldn't see beyond 20 feet. The wire ahead of them was outlined only by the occasional shimmer of moonlight reflecting on frost. Beyond that, nothing. A black so complete it made the mind fill in its own horrors. There were always sounds at night. Clicks, snaps, the rustle of rats in sandbags, water dripping from tin, the distant thump of mortars miles away and soft like a heartbeat slowing. But sometimes there were other sounds, sounds that didn't belong, screams, not frequent, but enough, sometimes sharp and sudden, the result of a mine, sometimes long, drawn out, and the kind of scream that started as a warning and ended in silence. Sometimes they didn't come from no man's land at all, sometimes they came from within. A man in another part of the trench had screamed last night, loud enough to jolt 3 others awake. When they reached him, he was already biting into his own sleeve, eyes wide, pupils blown open. He said nothing. He just rocked. Dream, the medic had said. Shell shock happens. But it wasn't the only time. Not by far. Tonight, though, was quieter. For now. He scanned the wire again. Nothing. Just fog pressing against the edges of the world. It moved like breath, slow, damp, unforgiving. Carter was on the next watch. He sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, head bowed, humming something beneath his breath. Not a song. A tone. A single note held and repeated like a lullaby for the earth. "You hear it?" Carter whispered suddenly. He paused. "Hear what?" Carter tilted his head. "There. Just beyond the wire." He listened. Nothing at first. Just wind. And then, maybe, a shuffle. A snap. A single footstep too slow to be a rat. His fingers tightened around the rifle. "No flare," Carter said. "Not unless we see eyes." Eyes. That was the rule. Don't shoot shadows, don't shoot shapes, only shoot what looks back at you. He hated that rule. They stood in silence, side by side, staring into a world that no longer had shape. A few moments passed. Then more. Then the sound again. Closer this time. A soft, wet footfall. Then nothing. "It's the ground," Carter said finally. "It settles sometimes. Makes you think it's breathing." He wanted to believe that. But he didn't answer. Night watches weren't just about seeing. They were about enduring. About holding still while your mind tried to pull you apart. You began to count things. Heartbeats, breaths, the rhythm of your fingers tapping against wood. You stared too long at empty spaces and began to give them names. You remembered things you hadn't thought of in years. A cough in a school hallway, the taste of orange peel, a dog barking 3 streets away. And always, beneath it all, you listened. Because it wasn't just the enemy you had to fear, but it was the silence. The space between sounds, the waiting. One night, a week before, a man named Egan had walked off during his watch. No one saw him go, no sounds, no footprints, just gone. They found his rifle propped neatly against the trench wall, his coat still warm. Some said he'd gone mad. Others whispered worse. They added another rule after that. Never stand alone. So Carter stayed with him even when the rules said one should sleep. At some point a new sound broke through the fog. Not a scream this time, but a song. Soft, high from the German side. A woman's voice playing from a phonograph. The language was foreign, but the sadness was not. It drifted across the wire like a ribbon, thin and trembling. Every man within hearing distance froze. Some knelt, some looked up. One man began to cry. The song ended. The fog remained. He felt something stir in his pocket, not alive, just remembered. The letter, and next to it the comb. He pulled them out slowly, feeling their weight in his palm. Memory and survival, comfort and pain. The rest of the shift passed without gunfire. At dawn, they were replaced by another pair. Carter nodded and disappeared into the dugout, still humming that single note. He lingered a moment longer, staring at the place where the scream had not come, where the song had. He pressed the letter back into his pocket, touched the comb once, and as he walked toward the rear of the trench, he whispered to no one in particular, "Still here." The fog didn't answer, but it watched. They came bundled in brown paper, tied with a bit of blue string and still carrying the faintest trace of lavender soap. Not the sharp, perfumed kind used by officers' wives, but the soft scent of drawers never fully emptied, of home and linen closets, and someone remembering your name in the dark. He found them in the bottom of the parcel beneath a tin of lozenges and a wrapped square of hard cheese that had already begun to sweat inside the wax. A short note came folded between the two socks, written in slanted, familiar handwriting. "Knit them tight this time, should be warmer. Love, M." He didn't need to check the initials. He knew the loops of that M better than his own name. His sister had written dozens of these letters by now, but only 2 pairs of socks. The first pair had long since been claimed by the trench, eaten by weeks of rain and mud that seeped in from every angle. But this pair was new, soft, thick, the kind of warm that wasn't just physical. Around him, parcels were being opened with reverence. It was a kind of ritual, not loud, not greedy, just slow hands, careful eyes, grateful murmurs. A tin of sardines, a scrap of chocolate wrapped in old newspaper, a photo dog-eared at the corner. Some of the men saved the brown string, said it reminded them of their wives' sewing kits, said it made the wrapping sacred. He unfolded the socks slowly, laying them across his lap like something holy. The wool was uneven in places, a few snags here and there, a tiny drop of red thread caught in the heel. It made them perfect. It meant they had been made by hand, by her hand. Changing socks in the trench wasn't an act of luxury, it was an act of survival. Men had lost toes in fewer days than fingers could count. Trenchfoot began quiet, a numbness in the soles, a little white around the edge of the nail. Then came swelling, blisters, and rot. Real rot. The kind that spread while you slept and didn't always wake with you in the morning. Sergeant Lorne had a rule: change them if the sun even thinks about coming out. No one argued. He removed the old pair first, carefully, as if peeling away skin. The socks stuck to him slightly, the fabric damp with cold sweat and rainwater. He rolled them down, revealing raw skin, paler than it should have been. He let his feet breathe for a moment, toes flexing awkwardly in the misted air. The new socks went on slow, one at a time, a careful slide. The warmth spread instantly, not just through the foot but up the leg, into the chest. It felt like something real, something untouched by the mud and the smoke and the smell of blood that always lingered in the corners. Carter watched from across the dugout, mouth tilted into half a grin. "You gonna marry those things or wear 'em?" He didn't answer, just wiggled his toes inside them and gave the smallest nod. "They're from my sister," he said softly. Carter said nothing after that, just looked down at his own boots, crumbling at the heel, and returned to patching his coat with wire thread. Later that evening, a boy named Ellis, barely 17 and thinner than most, was pulled from the trench with a fever. His feet had blackened. He hadn't told anyone until he couldn't walk. They wrapped him in a blanket, whispered something soft, and carried him to the medic station, though no one expected him to return. The socks from home became a symbol after that. The others asked if they could touch them, not wear them, just feel the stitching. Just hold a bit of the world that wasn't falling apart. He let them, one by one. Even Lorne, who rarely spoke to anyone without barking, held one in his gloved palm for a moment and nodded. That night, he folded them back into his coat pocket. Not because he feared losing them, but because they had become something else now. Not just warmth, not just cloth, but proof of care, of memory, of being someone to someone else. The cold returned as darkness fell, sharper than usual. The trench floor froze in places. Water turned to thin sheets of ice over the lower planks. Fingers fumbled, breath became steam, and still the socks held their warmth. During the midnight watch, while crouched near the wire, he found himself reaching down, pressing fingers to the fabric beneath his boot. It was still there, that warmth, that kindness, yes, that scent of lavender and safe hands. In a place where everything was temporary, firelight, food, names, the socks endured. Men scrambled, shouting over the roar, hands grasping for anything solid. Some slipped, caught beneath the sudden flood. Others hauled comrades free, pulling them from the thick, choking mud. He found himself pressed against a beam, water rising fast, cold, biting deep. The letter in his pocket was soaked through, the ink bleeding like a wound. The comb slipped from his grasp, lost beneath the rising tide. He kicked and fought, arms flailing, lungs burning. A hand found his wrist, steady and strong, pulling him upward. It was Carter. "Hold on," Carter shouted, voice rough with strain. Together they clawed their way to higher ground, soaked and shivering. Around them the trench was a river, debris swirling, darkness swallowing, silence waiting to claim what was left. In the days that followed, the damage was clear. The elbow had betrayed them, digging too deep into secrets best left buried. Walls collapsed. Waterlogged earth gave way beneath boots. The men worked tirelessly, rebuilding, shoring, patching, as if defying the trench itself to forget them. But some things the earth remembered. Whispers of lost footsteps beneath the mud. The creak of timber settling into decay. The slow, steady drip of water in places no light could reach. He stood at the edge of the elbow one evening, watching the trench breathe beneath a sky smeared with twilight. The water had receded, but the memory remained, a pulse beneath the ground, soft and unyielding. The letter, dry but fragile, rested against his chest. The comb was safe in his pocket, small anchors in a world shifting beneath him. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the earth and the quiet promise that no matter how deep the trench dug, some part of him remained above. The bell hung in the farthest corner of the camp, swaying gently in the cold breeze that carried whispers of fog and forgotten prayers. It was small, its metal dulled by years of rain and smoke, yet its sound was sharp, a cry that cut through the mist like a blade. No one remembered who had placed it there, or why, but all knew its toll marked moments heavy with meaning. It wasn't rung often, only in times when silence could no longer hold the weight of sorrow, when the trench had claimed another, when the earth demanded remembrance. But sometimes, on nights thick with fog and fear, the bell rang on its own. No hands touched the rope. No voices called it forth. It was the bell that shouldn't ring. One such night, he stood near the dugout's edge, boots sinking into the mud, eyes straining against the thick fog rolling in like a ghostly tide. The trench was quiet, too quiet, and the weight of waiting pressed against his chest. Then faintly he heard it. The bell's low, mournful peal, echoing through the mist, folding into the silence like a whisper too soft to be ignored. The men stirred, faces pale, voices hushed. Carter emerged from the shadows, eyes fixed on the bell as if seeing through the fog to something unseen. "It's her," he said, voice trembling. "The one who waits." No one asked who, no one needed to. They moved together, steps careful and slow toward the sound. The bell swung gently as if pushed by an unseen hand, its metal singing of loss and memory. The fog curled around them, soft and thick, muffling footsteps and voices alike. Near the bell, a letter lay on the ground, old, worn, edges curled. The same delicate handwriting from a distant world. He picked it up, feeling the paper tremble beneath his fingers. It was a message from home, long forgotten, carried by wind and time. The bell tolled again, low and steady, as if calling the past forward. They gathered close, sharing warmth and silence. The bell's sound wrapped around them. A ritual without words, a prayer without faith. It was a reminder that some losses cannot be measured in days or names, but in echoes that linger. That night, the trench breathed differently, not in anger or fear, but in remembrance. The bell's call faded with dawn, but its song remained, a fragile thread woven through memory and mud. and beneath the fog the trench held its breath. The world shattered around them in thunderous waves, but beneath the chaos, a soft song wove through the air. A fragile thread of sound caught between the roar of shells and the distant cries of men. It was not loud, not defiant, but gentle as a breath, as if carried on the wind itself. He first heard it when the bombardment began just after dusk. The sky lit in angry bursts, fire blooming against the darkening clouds. The earth trembled, sending shards of stone and dust into the air. Men ducked, shouted, and prayed in muted voices, but somewhere beyond the flare and smoke a voice sang. It was Carter. He sat crouched against a wall of sandbags, lips moving silently at first. Then the melody grew, low, haunting, filled with a sorrow that only the war could birth. The song was old, a lullaby his mother once hummed on cold winter nights. It wrapped around them, a fragile shield against the onslaught. Others joined in, some whispering, others humming. The song grew, not in volume but in strength, threading through the thunder and smoke, stitching moments of peace in a world unravelling. He closed his eyes and listened. The melody carried him away, to fields of green untouched by war, to quiet rooms lit by candlelight, to faces lost but never forgotten. The music was a promise, a prayer, a bridge between the past and the unbearable present. When the shells ceased and the dawn broke, the song lingered, a soft echo in tired hearts. The men rose, shoulders heavy but spirits touched, carrying the melody like a secret hope into the day. The uniform was more than cloth. It was a shield against the relentless cold, a banner of belonging, and a reminder of a world beyond the mud. But it was also fragile, frayed at the edges, faded by rain and smoke, marked by the countless days and nights spent beneath a sky heavy with sorrow. He noticed the last button one evening, just as the light was fading to a soft grey. The brass fastener hung by a single thread, swaying slightly with each breath he took. It was small, almost insignificant. Yet it held the weight of countless moments. Moments when the uniform was patched, when hands trembled while sewing, when pride clung stubbornly despite the wear. That button was a lifeline. He reached up carefully, fingers steady despite the cold, and secured it once more. The thread bit into his skin, but he didn't flinch. It was an act of defiance against the unravelling, a promise that he would hold together as long as he could. Around him, others worked on their uniforms in similar silence, stitching torn seams, brushing dirt away, smoothing creases that had long since lost their sharpness. Each small repair was a battle won against the decay of war. The button became a symbol not just of survival, but of identity, of the man beneath the mud and fatigue, of the brotherhood that endured beyond the trenches. He wore the uniform proudly, with that last button fastened tight. It was a small thing, but in the darkness, small things could hold the greatest light. The clock had long since lost its meaning here. Days melted into nights, and nights into days, wrapped in mud and mist, and the endless sound of distant gunfire. But there was a moment, a single heartbeat suspended in the cold early hours, when time itself seemed to stop. It was exactly 4 a.m. when it happened. He was crouched against the trench wall, boots soaked, fingers numb, eyes wide in the dim glow of a lantern struggling against the darkness. Around him, men breathed softly, their faces pale shadows, framed by the cold earth. The world was silent but for the distant rumble of artillery and the faint drip of water seeping through the boards. Then the whistle blew, not a warning, not a call to arms, but a sharp piercing note that cut through the stillness like a blade. It was followed by a pause, a breath held, before the ground erupted in thunder. The bombardment was sudden and fierce, shaking the trench to its core. Wood splintered, earth flew, men shouted and ducked. Yet within that chaos, something changed. Time fractured. For those moments the world held its breath. He felt himself lifted, carried on the roar, suspended between fear and flight. The air filled with smoke and dust, burning eyes and choked lungs. Yet amid the terror, a strange calm took hold, a stillness deep beneath the storm. It was a pause in the relentless march of war, a breath stolen from the teeth of death. When the noise faded, the trench was scarred but standing. Men rose slowly, shaken but alive. The sky was pale with approaching dawn, the mist beginning to thin. He looked at his hands, trembling but whole, the letter still safe in his coat, the comb still pressed in his palm. Time had frozen at 4 a.m, and in that frozen moment he remembered what it meant to be alive. The night had swallowed the trench whole, the sky hung low and heavy, pressing down like a silent judge. Shadows clung to the earth and whispered of the losses that no one dared speak aloud. Somewhere beneath the cold mud and the trembling air, a friend lay still, buried by the morning that had yet to come. He had known him only briefly, a boy with eyes too old for his years, hands rough from work and worry. They had shared cigarettes, half smiles, and stories whispered in the dark. His laughter was a rare gift, fragile and fleeting, a thread of light in the endless gloom. The shell struck without warning, a sudden, shattering force that ripped through the trench, tearing wood and earth alike. Men screamed, ducked, and covered. When the dust settled, the boy was gone, swallowed by the earth he had called home. The morning came slow. Pale light filtered through ragged clouds, revealing the scarred trench and the hollow where he had been. They dug quietly, hands trembling, hearts heavy. No words were spoken, none were needed. The body was lifted gently, wrapped in the one tattered remnants of a uniform. A small letter was found clutched in his hand, words never sent, promises unspoken. It was laid beside him in the grave, folded with care. They buried him beneath the cold sky, the earth swallowing him with a soft sigh. The simple cross was carved from splintered wood, marked with a name and a date, the only lasting memory in a place where memories were fragile. He stood beside the grave, feeling the weight of loss settle deep within. The trench around him breathed softly, mourning with a quiet sorrow. The friend was gone, but not forgotten, and as the wind stirred the soil, he whispered a promise to carry him forward, in stories, in vince, in the spaces between breath and memory. The dugout's dim light flickered softly, casting long shadows on the cracked wooden walls. It was a rare moment of reprieve, a brief pause from the relentless mud and gunfire. Soap, a small tin of it, was passed carefully between hands, its scent faint but sharp in the damp air. Shaving was a ritual now, not for vanity, but for reclaiming a sliver of humanity in a world unravelling. He sat before a cracked mirror, the glass cloudy and streaked with grime. His reflection wavered, a ghost trapped between light and shadow. He lifted the razor slowly, fingers trembling not from cold but from something deeper. Each stroke was a battle, each whisker falling like a lost memory. The act was both cleansing and cruel. It washed away the grime but not the weariness. It smoothed skin but not the scars etched beneath. The mirror showed a face he barely recognised, eyes haunted, lips tight, a soul weighed down by silence. Beside him, Carter moved with practised ease, humming a soft tune as he worked on his own face. The sound was a balm, a fragile thread holding them to the world beyond the trenches. For a moment, the war faded, replaced by the simple human need to care for oneself. Outside, the trench breathed its cold, steady rhythm. The wind whispered through the barbed wire, carrying distant echoes of lost voices, but inside the mirror held a fragile promise, that beneath the dirt and despair there was still a man who could look back. He finished, wiping his face with a damp cloth. The razor was dull now, but his resolve was sharper than ever. He met his own gaze, searching for the boy who had once dreamed of home. The ghost in the mirror flickered, then steadied, and he whispered to himself, "Still here." The morning broke, or so it seemed, but the fog refused to yield. It clung to the trench like a living thing, thick and relentless, swallowing sound and shape alike. The world beyond the wire was hidden, blurred into a pale, endless grey, a place both familiar and terrifyingly unknown. He stood at the edge of the trench, boots sunk in mud, eyes searching the haze for any sign of movement. The silence was heavier than any gunfire, pressing in, muffling breaths and footsteps. The fog wasn't just water in the air, it was a veil, a barrier between what was and what might be. Men whispered of the fog with quiet dread. They said it carried voices, echoes from the past or perhaps warnings from the future. Some swore they saw shapes moving just beyond sight, shadows that vanished when looked at directly. Others claimed the fog was a curse a cloak hiding more than just the enemy. He felt the fog seep into his bones, cold and wet, a slow chill that settled beneath his skin. It blurred his memories too, folding the sharp edges of the past into soft shadows. The letter in his pocket was damp now, the ink running faint like a fading dream. Carter joined him silently, his breath steady, eyes calm despite the haze. Together they waited, not knowing what for, but certain that the fog held its own secrets. As the day wore on, the fog showed no sign of lifting. Orders were shouted into the mist, lost before reaching ears. Men stumbled, guided only by the feel of the trench walls, trusting touch more than sight. In the stillness he thought of home, of clear skies and sharp sunlight, of windows thrown open to warm air. The fog was a reminder of everything stolen, a barrier between then and now. When night fell, the fog remained, thick and unyielding, wrapping the trench in a soft, suffocating embrace. And beneath it, the trench held its breath, waiting for dawn that might never come clear. The cold had seeped into the bones of the trench, wrapping everything in a brittle silence that whispered of endless nights and lost years. But on that Christmas Eve, something shifted, softly, like a breath against frozen glass. It began as a faint murmur, a melody carried on the wind through the wire and mud. From the dugouts and dark corners, voices rose together, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. A fragile choir in a world fractured by war. Carols that spoke of peace, hope, and home, floating above the barbed wire and shattered earth. He sat on the edge of the trench, a small candle flickering in his hands, its light trembling like a heartbeat. Around him, men gathered quietly, faces pale in the glow, eyes reflecting memories of hearth and family. The usual weight of fear and exhaustion seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile warmth that wrapped around them like a shared secret. Carter approached, carrying a small package wrapped in cloth, a loaf of stale bread and a handful of sugar cubes. The gift was meagre but precious, a reminder of kindness amidst the chaos. They exchanged silent smiles, understanding that in this moment the war paused, not in battles or orders, but in the simple act of remembering. Some men exchanged stories of Christmases past, tables laden with food, laughter echoing through warm rooms, the scent of pine and spices. Others spoke of letters unopened, songs forgotten, and dreams deferred. The carols wove through the trench like a balm, soothing wounds unseen, binding hearts separated by miles and time. For a few hours the trench became a sanctuary. The rats and mud faded into the background. The cold was forgotten, replaced by the glow of candlelight and shared humanity. Even the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, their light piercing the fog that so often swallowed hope. As midnight approached, the singing softened, voices blending into a gentle hum. The candle burned low, casting long shadows that danced on the trench walls. He held the letter close, feeling the warmth of words unspoken and love preserved. In the stillness he whispered a prayer, not for the war to end, but for moments like this to linger, for the light to return, for home to be more than a memory. The trench held its breath, cradling the fragile gift of Christmas beneath the endless sky. The trench was a place where laughter was scarce, a rare bloom pushing through cracked earth and ash. But near the wire one evening, under a sky heavy with stars and silent threats, a sound rose, soft, uncertain, and utterly alive. It began as a whisper, a joke passed between two men whose voices barely dared to rise. Then another joined in, a chuckle caught between shivers and exhaustion. Slowly the laughter grew, careful at first, like a candle flickering against a cold wind. He sat nearby, rifle resting against the wooden planks, eyes drawn to the small circle of men sharing this fragile joy. They laughed at a story of a rat that stole a sausage, at a misstep during a drunken night, at a nickname too crude for daylight. Their faces were lit with smiles that broke through the grime and fatigue. The sound was muffled by the earth, swallowed by the thick air, yet it held a power all its own, a momentary shield against the relentless weight of war. For a few breaths, the trench was not mud and blood, but friendship and light. Carter caught his gaze, eyes bright with mirth, and nudged him gently. He smiled, a slow, grateful curve, and let the laughter wash over the cold. In a place where hope was often buried, that laughter was a seed, fragile, fleeting but fiercely alive. And beneath the wire, the trench held its breath, cradling that spark until the dawn. The mud was soft and heavy beneath their boots, swallowing footprints as quickly as they were made. Each step left a mark, a story carved in earth, but the trench was a place where tracks vanished, swallowed by rain, erased by time, lost in the endless churn of war. He paused at the edge of a small puddle, staring down at the fading impressions of boots, some deep and confident, others light and unsure. They told no tales here, no victories or defeats, just passages, beginnings and endings all blurred into one. The rain had softened the soil, turning the ground into a mirror that reflected the grey sky and the weight pressing down. Somewhere beyond, the wire lay tangled and silent, a boundary between worlds that no one dared cross. He traced a finger along one print, imagining the man who had made it, the weight he carried, the hopes folded beneath the soul, the path walked again and again with uncertain steps. Around him others moved quietly, boots slipping, faces turned down. The trench was a river of footsteps flowing toward a destination unknown. Carter approached, breaking the stillness with a soft cough. "Every print's a story," he said, "but some stories, they don't end like we want." He nodded, eyes fixed on the muddy paths that led to nowhere, like echoes fading in a forgotten dream. The trench breathed softly, keeping secrets beneath its mud, memories pressed deep, waiting to be found. The cough came suddenly, breaking the fragile quiet like a shard of glass dropped on stone. It was dry at first, barely more than a rasp in the throat, but it grew, hacking, wrenching, pulling at the body with relentless insistence. The sound echoed down the trench, a grim reminder of the invisible war waging within. He had heard it before, the cough of exhaustion, of cold air biting deep into lungs already strained. But this was different. It carried weight, a shadow behind every breath. Around him, men exchanged glances, wary, tired. Some covered their mouths, others simply looked away, unwilling to acknowledge the shared vulnerability. The man coughing was Ellis, barely more than a boy, his cheeks sunken and pale beneath the grime. Each fit racked his frame, leaving him gasping for air, clutching at his chest as if to hold his breath inside. The medic arrived quickly, hands gentle but firm. He listened to the lungs, checked the fever, offered words of comfort that felt as fragile as the boy's strength. They wrapped Ellis in blankets, moved him to the dry corner of the dugout, a place of quiet and whispered prayers. But even there, the cough followed, a cruel companion to solitude. He sat nearby, sharing the silence, a presence more powerful than words. The trench had taught them many lessons, but none so harsh as the knowledge that illness was as much a foe as any bullet. In the shared cough, there was a bond, a fragile thread weaving together pain and hope, fear and resilience. The silence that followed spoke volumes, a language understood without speaking. He touched the letter in his pocket, the comb next to it, anchors in a sea of uncertainty. And as the night deepened, he whispered a wish for healing, for the boy, for the trench, for the world beyond the wire. The bayonet lay half buried in the churned mud, its blade dull and streaked with rust. It was a silent witness to moments long past, a relic of struggle and survival abandoned beneath a sky heavy with smoke and sorrow. The metal caught what little light filtered through the fog, a glint of memory in a world dimmed by war. He found it on a morning thick with mist, the trench still holding its breath from the night's shelling. The bayonet was angled just so, as if dropped in haste or grief, forgotten by the hand that once wielded it. He knelt, fingers brushing the cold steel, tracing the worn grip that had tightened in fear, in hope, in desperation. The object spoke without words, of charges led, of close calls and whispered prayers, of lives balanced on the edge of a blade. It was a fragment of a story he might never fully know, yet it pulsed with the weight of all those lost in silence. Carter appeared beside him, eyes narrowing as he took in the sight. "Left behind," he said quietly, "not always by choice." They lifted the bayonet together, careful, as if handling a fragile piece of the past. It was cleaned as best they could, oil and cloth working to revive a sheen dulled by time and blood. For a moment the trench felt less like a tomb and more like a place where stories lingered, told not in words but in the objects left behind. He slipped the bayonet carefully into his pack, alongside the letter and comb, each a tether to a life beyond the mud, each a reminder of what it meant to keep going. As the day wore on, the bayonet rested near his heart, a silent promise that even in loss something endured. The envelope was worn and softened by countless hands, its edges frayed like the hopes folded within. But despite the grime of war and the miles travelled through rain and mud, it carried a faint scent, delicate, soothing, a whisper of lavender that lingered like a memory of home. He held the letter gently, fingers tracing the faded ink of a familiar name. The smell was unexpected amidst the acrid smoke and cold earth, a fragile thread connecting the trench to a world untouched by gunfire. The scent stirred something deep within, a longing, a comfort, a reminder that somewhere beyond the wire, life continued. Somewhere, a hand had pressed lavender between pages, a heart had thought of him, a voice had whispered his name. Around him, men opened their own letters with quiet reverence. Some smiled briefly, others stared long and silent, the weight of words too heavy to bear aloud. The mail was a lifeline, a fragile bridge between worlds, carried on wings of hope and longing. He unfolded the letter carefully, breathing in the lavender scent again. The words spoke of waiting, of prayers, of gardens blooming under the watchful sun. They were soft and slow, a balm against the harshness of the trench. In the flickering light of the dugout, surrounded by shadows and silence, the lavender carried him home, if only for a moment. In the stillness before sleep, his mind wandered far beyond the trench, to a place where light danced softly across walls painted warm yellow, a kitchen bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon. The scent of simmering stew, the clatter of utensils, and the gentle hum of a clock ticking on the wall filled that memory, a fragile sanctuary amid the endless grey. He saw the worn wooden table, its surface scarred by years of family meals and quiet conversations. The window stood open, curtains fluttering gently in a breeze that carried the sweet smell of blossoms from the garden. Somewhere nearby, laughter echoed softly, a sound so distant and precious it threatened to break his heart. In dreams, he sat at that table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, feeling warmth seep through chilled fingers. The yellow walls held stories of home, of safety, of love, of ordinary moments made extraordinary by their absence here in the trench. But even as the dream offered refuge, the weight of reality pressed close. The mud beneath his boots, the cold biting at his skin, the distant thunder of artillery, all reminders of the world he must return to when dawn broke. He woke slowly, the yellow walls fading, replaced once more by wooden planks and the damp scent of earth. Yet the memory lingered, a beacon of light to carry him through the long night ahead. The mind, like the body, bore wounds unseen yet deeply felt. In the quiet hours, when the earth settled and the guns silenced, shadows would creep into the corners of his thoughts, lingering, watching, waiting. These were not the shadows cast by the trench walls, but those born from the chaos within. He called it shell shock, though no word could fully capture the tempest raging beneath calm exteriors. It began with tremors, a sudden jolt in the chest, a heartbeat pounding like war drums when no battle raged outside. Then came the visions, flashes of explosions, faces distorted in fear, the crushing weight of earth and loss. One night, as the trench lay wrapped in fog, he awoke to a presence beside him, a shadow shaped like a man, yet shifting and insubstantial. The figure stared with eyes empty yet accusing, reflecting fears he dared not speak. He tried to reach out, but his limbs felt leaden, his voice a whisper lost in the wind. The shadow receded only to return with each flash of lightning, each distant blast, a relentless echo of terror. Carter found him trembling at dawn, eyes wide and unfocused. He said nothing, but pressed a hand to his shoulder, grounding him in the present, a silent promise that he was not alone. Days passed in a blur of whispered prayers and unspoken fears. The trench became both sanctuary and prison, the line between memory and nightmare blurred. Yet amidst the darkness small lights shone, the touch of a friend's hand, a shared cigarette, the quiet strength of presence. He held tight to the letter and comb, symbols of connection and resilience. anchors in the storm of his mind. Shellshock was a battle without end, fought in silence and shadows, and though the enemy was unseen, he refused to surrender. She arrived like a whisper in the chaos, a figure wrapped in white, eyes steady and hands gentle amidst the noise of pain and fear. The nurse who said nothing but stayed became a silent guardian, a presence that held the fractured pieces of the wounded together with quiet grace. He first noticed her in the dugout, where the wounded lay crammed among splintered boards and fading lantern light. Her touch was soft yet firm as she tended to broken limbs and fevered brows. She did not speak much. Words seemed unnecessary when the world was so heavy with suffering. Her gaze met his once, a brief, understanding look that conveyed more than any speech. It was a lifeline thrown across the abyss, a promise that he was not forgotten, not invisible. She moved through the trench like a calm river, steadying the frantic and soothing the silent. With each bandage wrapped and each cup of water offered, she wove hope into the fabric of despair. The others whispered her name with reverence. The angel, or simply she who stays. She never left. Even when the nights grew cold and the shells fell close, her presence was a balm, a quiet rebellion against the relentless dark. One evening, when he lay fevered and trembling, she sat beside him without a word, holding his hand until the chill passed. In that stillness he found strength, not from medicines, but from the unwavering comfort of someone who chose to stay. The nurse said nothing, but in her silence spoke volumes, and in the heart of the trench, that silence became a song of resilience. The injuries here were not always visible. Some wounds screamed in silence, hidden beneath layers of cloth, muscle and bone. They did not drip blood or stain uniforms, but they bled nonetheless, into the mind, into the heart, into the very spirit of a man. He had seen many such wounds. The trembling hand that no one noticed until it fumbled a rifle. The vacant stare of a friend who spoke little but carried worlds of sorrow in his eyes. The cough that lingered long after the gas had cleared, a shadow of pain that no medicine could touch. His own pain was quiet, a dull ache behind the ribs, a weight that pressed down but refused to show. He kept it hidden, wrapped in layers of stoicism and fatigue, afraid that to acknowledge it might break what little strength remained. At times it made the nights unbearable. Sleep would come in fragments, pierced by dreams too sharp to forget. He woke with his heart pounding, the phantom sensation of cold steel or burning flesh lingering beneath his skin. The trench offered little comfort for such wounds. There was no bandage thick enough, no salve potent enough to heal scars unseen. The men learned to carry their pain with quiet dignity, sharing it only in glances or half-spoken words. One day, a medic pulled him aside. "It's not the body that breaks first," he said softly. "It's the mind, the soul." Those words settled like a stone in his chest. He began to understand that survival was more than flesh and blood. It was the slow, steady battle to hold on to oneself. The letter in his pocket, the comb at his side, they became more than tokens. They were anchors in a storm of shadows. Wounds that didn't bleed out loud still left their mark, and though unseen, they were never forgotten. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the soft flicker of a single candle's flame. It stood alone on a makeshift altar, nothing more than a crate draped with a threadbare cloth, yet its light stretched far beyond the dim corners of the trench, reaching into the shadows that swallowed so many stories. He knelt beside it, hands folded, breath steady despite the cold gnawing at his bones. Around him, the others gathered quietly, faces worn and eyes heavy with memories that refused to rest. They were not men of ceremony, but in this fragile moment they became keepers of the forgotten. The candle was lit for the unnamed, the brothers lost without markers, without names carved on wood or stone, those swallowed by mud and silence, whose graves were the earth itself. They spoke no words aloud. The trench had long taught them the weight of silence. Instead, each offered a thought, a memory, a prayer held deep in the heart. The candle's glow danced on tired faces, weaving a tapestry of light in a world too often shrouded in darkness. He thought of the boy whose laughter once brightened the trench, now buried beneath cold earth. Of the friend lost in a gas attack, body never found. of the stranger whose boots never touched home again. The flame flickered as a breeze whispered through the wire, carrying with it a soft rustle, a reminder that even in absence, presence remained. They stayed as one, guardians of memory, until the candle burned low, a beacon of hope against the endless night. And as the light faded, he whispered a promise to the wind that none would be forgotten. The morning paper arrived like a fragile breath from a distant world. Folded and creased, its headlines screamed of peace declared, wars ended, treaties signed. The words were bold, hopeful, and filled with the promise of a dawn free from gunfire and grief. He held the newspaper loosely, the print blurring in his eyes, not from tears, but from a heart weighed down by years of shadow. Around him, the trench stirred with cautious optimism, men reading aloud, sharing fragments of news that felt almost unreal. Yet, beneath the surface, the mind remained restless. The promise of peace did not quiet the echoes of explosions, nor did it soothe the silent screams that haunted sleepless nights. The trenches were still etched deep within, the mud, the blood, the loss woven into every breath. He folded the paper slowly, tracing the bold letters one last time before slipping it into his pocket. The letter from home rested beside it, a reminder that some things endure beyond headlines and treaties. Outside, the world shifted toward calm, but within, memories remained fierce and unyielding. The war's end was written on paper, but in his mind the battle continued, quiet, relentless, unseen. And so he breathed in the fragile peace, carrying the weight of war within. The trench had long since fallen silent. Years had passed since the gun stilled, the barbed wire was cut away and the earth began to heal its scars. Yet when he returned, older now, bones wearier and eyes sharper with memory, the place still breathed, whispering stories carved deep into the soil. He stood at the edge where the trench once carved its narrow path, now overgrown with wildflowers and tangled grass. The ground beneath was soft, warmed by the gentle sun, but beneath the surface the earth held memories, buried bones, rusted helmets, the echo of footsteps long faded. Time had transformed the landscape, blurring the lines between war and peace. The barbed wire was gone, replaced by fences and fences beyond them, fields that rolled gently toward distant hills. But the trench remained, an invisible scar beneath the bloom, a quiet presence that refused to be erased. He knelt, fingers brushing away dirt and moss to uncover a fragment of twisted metal, once a bayonet perhaps, or a piece of a shattered shell. The cold touched his skin, but the past warmed his heart, weaving a connection between then and now. As he walked the length of the trench, memories unfurled like ghosts along the path. The moments lived and lost. The laughter, the fear, the brotherhood, rose softly, carried on the breeze. Each step echoed with names spoken softly in the night, prayers whispered into the wind. A faded letter slipped from his coat pocket, the one that had journeyed with him through mud and fire. He unfolded it carefully, tracing the familiar handwriting that had anchored him to a world beyond the trenches. The comb, worn smooth by years of use, rested in his other hand, a symbol of survival, of small victories won against the relentless tide. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land. The trench, though silent, seemed to pulse with life beneath the surface, holding its breath as if waiting for a story to be told once more. He stood in that quiet twilight, feeling the weight of time and memory mingling in the air. The trench was no longer a place of war, but a sacred ground where history slept, waiting to awaken in the hearts of those who remembered. And as the stars began to pierce the darkening sky, he whispered a vow, not of forgetting but of remembrance, to carry the trench within him, to honour the past, and to live with the quiet strength of those who had walked its narrow paths. The trench had changed, but its story lived on, etched not in stone but in memory, in breath, in the soft pulse of the earth beneath his feet. The earth was soft, dark and damp beneath his fingers as he knelt at the edge of a shallow grave. It was a place unmarked by stones or crosses, no name carved in wood to call the soul back from silence. Only the soil, freshly turned and heavy with rain, bore witness to the life that had once breathed above it, now folded beneath the weight of history and forgetfulness. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a letter, worn and yellowed, edges curled from years of being folded and unfolded. The ink had faded but not vanished, still legible to the touch, still carrying the voice of a sister who had once dreamed of his return. The letter was a fragile thing, like a whisper caught in a bottle, meant for a world that might never hear. He pressed the paper gently to the earth, just beneath where the body rested, the body of a friend whose name had been lost in the chaos of battle. The grave was one of many, clustered haphazardly along the edge of the trench, marked only by uneven mounds and the occasional piece of splintered wood. The rain had come earlier that day, and the ground was soft enough to swallow footsteps, erasing tracks as if the world itself wished to forget. He traced his fingers along the edge of the grave, feeling the cold seep into his skin, the dampness a reminder of how close death and earth had become. No one had claimed this grave. No letters had been sent to mark it. No flags waved above it in honour or remembrance. It was a place where the fallen were folded into the soil like whispered prayers, voices fading beneath the endless grey sky. He closed his eyes and imagined the boy who had once stood here, the laughter that had echoed through the trench, the quiet moments shared over stolen bread and whispered hopes. He remembered the way the boy's eyes had held both fear and fierce determination, a fragile flame flickering in the darkness. The letter, worn and creased, was all that remained to tell the story. As he sat beside the grave, the wind stirred the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender, the same scent that clung to the letter, a fragrant thread tying the past to the present. He breathed deeply, letting the memory wash over him like a tide, gentle and relentless. Around him, the trench lay silent, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. The world seemed to hold its breath, honouring the nameless fallen with a quiet reverence. He thought of all the graves like this one, unmarked, unnamed, but filled with lives that mattered, stories that deserved to be told, each a testament to sacrifice, to courage, to the cost of war. Rising slowly, he pressed the letter once more into the earth, a final offering to a friend lost but not forgotten. As he walked away, the rain began again, soft and steady, washing over the trench and the grave alike. The earth drank deeply, carrying with it the letter and the memory, folding them into the silent song of the land. And beneath the soil the story lived on, whispered in the wind, cradled in the rain, eternal as the stars that watched over the night. The rain fell steadily, a soft and endless hymn that washed over the trenches, the fields, and the broken earth where men once stood and fell. It whispered through the hollow bones of trees and seeped into the soil that had swallowed countless stories, carrying with it the weight of memory and loss. He stood beneath of the heavy grey sky, watching the droplets gather on blades of grass, tracing rivulets down weathered wooden boards. The trench was gone now, reclaimed by nature's slow hands, barbed wire rusted into coils of forgotten steel, earth softened and reshaped, wildflowers blooming where soldiers had marched. Yet the rain remembered. It remembered the footfalls that had echoed in the mud, the whispered prayers beneath the moon, the shouts and screams swallowed by time. It held the sorrow of the nameless graves, the laughter shared in fleeting moments of peace, the courage of those who had fought beneath skies heavy with smoke. As the rain soaked into his coat, he closed his eyes and felt the pulse of the past beneath his feet, a rhythm slow and steady, the heartbeat of the land itself. The letter, folded and fragile, rested in his pocket. The comb, worn and smooth, was tucked safely in his hand. They were anchors to a world that lived on, even as the war faded into silence. The droplets traced paths down his face, mingling with tears he did not fight. He thought of the friends lost and found, of the love that endured beyond the mud and blood, of the peace that was hard-won and deeply cherished. The rain fell on, gentle and unyielding, a soft witness to the stories etched in earth and heart. It carried the memories forward, cradling them in its endless song. And beneath the quiet storm, the trench lived still, in every drop, every whisper, every breath of wind that moved through the fields. The rain remembered, and so did he.